Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. And today we have an author in our studio. Her name is Curtis Sittenfeld. She has a book, a novel called Prep, which is now out in paperback, published by Random House, and I thank you for coming by.
Thank you for having me.
This is a very popular book. It was 9 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list as a hardcover, and just did a couple of 3 weeks as a paperback. So I think you're doing very well.
Thank you.
The Boston Globe liked it. They said Prep may be as addictive as M&Ms, but it's also a tart and a complete tale of social class, race, and gender politics. There's two things about that review that strike me as ringing true. The first thing is addictive. You, in my opinion, have created a place where you've come up with a world that's very fascinating, very interesting, and which I found addictive. I couldn't get out of the darn thing.
Thank you.
And the other thing is that, as the Globe says, at the base of the tale is social class, and it's because the main character, Miss Fiora, comes from beautiful downtown South Bend, Indiana, and AULT, A-U-L-T, the prep school in question, is located where? Well,
it's not exactly specified. I mean, it's in Massachusetts, and then beyond that, it's in
somewhat near Boston.
Yeah, it's Raymond, Massachusetts, which, as far as I know, doesn't exist. I mean, maybe it does. Yeah, but to my knowledge, it doesn't.
Yeah. Now the main character is a self-described nobody from South Bend, Indiana, who finds herself in this place that I found very, very, very addictive. It's a place of wealth, history, and position. What's it modeled on?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of boarding schools, and then two New England boarding schools that are very similar to each other. And so I would say that it could be describing one of, probably 50 schools. Yeah. In real life, I did happen to go to boarding school, and the boarding school that I went to is called Groton. So. Okay.
And this is a place where they have chapel every day, and they have a dining hall where they make important and unimportant announcements. Some of the announcements are made by the students with double entendre. Yeah.
I mean, but the funny thing is, I based some of the sort of geography of the campus and some of the sort of traditions and rituals of the campus on Groton, where I had gone. But I finished writing the book when I was teaching part-time at St. Albans, which is a boys' school in Washington, D.C. And actually...
A boarding school?
It's only about 10% boarders, so it has a few, but not many. But the funny thing was, after the book came out, a lot of the St. Albans students and some of the teachers thought that elements of the book that I had taken from Groton had been taken from St. Albans because, of course, there's so much overlap, among all these schools. And so, or I've had people say to me, clearly you did research at Exeter, or, you must have graduated.
I'm positive.
Oh, yeah. Literally. I mean, a friend of a friend, or actually a woman a friend of mine knows, said, Curtis must have based the school on Northfield Mount Herman. And my friend said, I don't think so. And the woman said, no, I think she did. So, the schools are very similar to each other.
Maybe as you tour now, you could have a contest. See who wants to bet what on it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too, because when I give readings, some of them, like for instance, I just read in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which you wouldn't think of as being a sort of, hotbed of boarding school graduates, but it was. When I gave my reading, it was almost like people giving testimonials and standing up and saying, I went to boarding school and, this resonated with me. And so I think the book does bring boarding school graduates out of the woodwork, even in unlikely places.
In the main, this is Lee's story, because Lee is this young girl from South Bend, Indiana. She was always at the top of her class. The teachers loved her. She was always responsive. And then she goes to alt, and she's like tongue-tied. She can't talk.
Yeah.
What's going on with her?
Well, I think that she sort of realizes that compared to other students, she's not incredibly talented. And I think in a lot of books or in movies, sometimes people will have a sort of negative view of themselves, but hers is justified.
Now, prep is not just Lee's story. It's also the story of some other very fascinating fellow students. We're going to meet some of them when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at JimFosterCoc or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Prep is the novel's title. Curtis Sittenfeld is the author. Random House has just put it out in paperback. And Marie Claire, the magazine. Not the woman. Marie Claire writes, "Do you remember what high school felt like?" Oh, God, yes. Curtis Sittenfeld does, and she captures the experience brilliantly. Angst is everywhere between the pages, but so, too, is wit, wisdom, and empathy. Now, the angst-ridden one is our main character, and there are times when I was in there with her and her many, quote, problems, unquote, that I wanted to wring her neck. Mm-hmm. But I guess that's what we want to do with teenagers, isn't it?
Well, I
time
think
to time.
Certainly. I mean, you're not alone in feeling that. I think some people feel very frustrated with Lee, or they. One of my favorite things that a reader said was it was a teenage girl herself, and she said that she felt like it was a choose your own adventure book where the main character always made the choice that she, the reader, would not have made. You know, that she just and so I
did it wrong.
Yeah. That you want to sort of jump into the pages of the book and set her straight.
Yeah. Well, you really you captured me. Now, the other thing that we need to understand is that it just isn't Lee's story. As I said, she's surrounded by some interesting characters. In her first year, one of her roommates is Dee Dee Schwartz, who is trying very hard to be popular. Mm-hmm. She's always running down to other people's rooms. Mm-hmm. And she's somewhat good looking, but somewhere, and I don't know whether this was Lee who said this, but someone says, but her legs are a bit heavy.
Yeah. I think that she sort of, Dee Dee's kind of a follower or a worshiper of the most popular girls, whereas Lee kind of opts out of the system and which I'm not sure who makes the wiser choice, but I think that Lee sort of sees Dee Dee as her opposite. Like, Dee Dee is who Lee would be if Lee made an embarrassing effort, an embarrassing degree of effort.
Mm-hmm. One of the other people in the dorm in that first year is Little Washington, who's part of the, filling the minority quota, I guess, at this school. Tell us about Little Washington.
Well, she's a character. I like her, and I feel like she's sort of funny and lively, and Lee identifies Little as someone she'd like to be friends with. And then there's sort of a plot twist which some readers have pointed out that Little makes a choice and that she is punished for, and then later Lee makes a similar choice and isn't punished. Yeah, yes. And that there does seem to be this double standard which could be tied to race.
I think we best not go into specifics there.
Okay.
The person that really hangs in there, I would say, with Lee the most and the best is a her roommate over the last 3 years, Martha Porter, who also becomes the senior prefect.
There's a boy
Tell us
senior
about
prefect.
being a senior prefect.
It's sort of the boarding school version of class president, where you're supposed to take a kind of conspicuous leadership role and just be a well-balanced, intelligent person.
Okay. And she does all kinds of things to support our friend Lee throughout the book. And at one point, Lee, however, is much more involved with her romantic escapades with one Cross Sugarman. What a name! Cross is a stud. Cross is a star on the basketball team. And somehow this uncertain person lacking in confidence, our friend Lee, captures him.
Or sort of.
Sort of.
She's on the verge of capturing him for a long time.
What is Sugarman all about?
Well, I mean, I wanted to, as a writer, I think I wanted to create a character who would seem to justify kind of obsessive teenage love.
Aha. And you chose a man with the name of Cross Sugarman. Yeah. Okay. Nobody's going to call up and say, my name is Cross and I'm cross about this. Yeah. That could never happen. In the background of all this, and once in a while they jump to the foreground, are her mother and father, Linda and Terry Fiora. And he's the proud seller of mattresses in a place where everybody is counting money they haven't folded yet. All right. In the way it captures the many aspects of boarding school life, Prep is a tour de force. And we're going to look at some of the highlights after these words.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster, and we're ready to go with part 3 of this week's Conversations on the Coast. We're pleased to have with us Curtis Sittenfeld, the author of Prep, a novel now in paperback from your friends at Random House. The New York Times Book Review said in part, Sittenfeld's dialogue is so convincing that one wonders if she didn't wear a wire under her hockey kilt.
I know, it's sort of a provocative quote.
Yes.
Kind of racy.
What's a hockey kilt?
It's a kilt you wear to play hockey, field hockey.
Oh, field
or
hockey.
lacrosse
I'm sorry.
also.
I was thinking, ice hockey. And,
no, you wear more sort of padding.
It just didn't go. So, but I mean, in the interest of journalism, and this isn't really serious journalism here, but I need to ask the question, did you indeed wear a wire?
Actually, I barely played sports in which you wore a kilt. I played lacrosse very briefly, but I was more of sort of an inept soccer player most of the time.
Okay. Inept soccer player,
yes.
But then you were not wearing a kilt at the time.
Or I was not wearing a wire at any point, not to my knowledge.
There's to me, a sad, almost tragic underlying story in Prep, and that is the relationship among our friend Lee and her mom and dad, Linda and Terry. And there's when the two of them get on campus for parents visiting weekend, Terry is very proud that he's a successful business person in downtown South Bend, Indiana, and he sells mattresses, which is not too good in terms of what else is going on around there. And the thing that bothers me, or that I see as almost tragic, is the daughter's rejection of the parents throughout. Does this happen a lot?
Well, I think that a lot of people do feel sort of self-conscious about their parents or their parents' behavior when they're in high school. They feel, sort of embarrassed. But I think the good news is that a lot of times that blows over, and that sort of, your relationship might be at your worst, at its worst with your parents when you're a teenager, and then it improves after that, and you sort of look back in horror at your own behavior. So I think that it is that relationship, the parent relationship, does suffer in the course of the novel, but I like to think that after the novel ends, things get better for the Fioras.
Another indication that being a parent requires a lot of patience.
Yes, I certainly think so.
Now, there's one thing that Lee does in here, and she's always trying to win approval. She's always trying to win acceptance from her fellow students and so on. And there's one thing that she does that does win a lot of approval, which struck me as rather strange. She cuts hair. Mm-hmm. What the heck is that all about?
Well, I do think that it's pretty common among teenagers.
Yeah, but they got all this money, these people.
Yeah, but they're isolated on a campus, and it's I sort of
in Raymond, Massachusetts.
Yes, in Raymond, Massachusetts. But it appealed to me to write about haircutting because it's this weird sort of intimate act, even though there doesn't have to be any sort of emotional intimacy that goes along with it. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can find yourself interacting physically very closely with someone even though you barely know them, and in a lot of ways that's how Lee often interacts with people. She lives very closely with people in dorms or in classes, and kind of remains a stranger to a lot of them.
Yeah, she always is not quite there. Not quite with it. There's a practice at this school, which I've never heard of before, at least with this meaning: spring cleaning. Mm-hmm. And Lee's almost cleaned.
Mm-hmm. She's almost spring cleaned.
What's her problem?
Well, it's basically when at the end of a school year, you don't get kicked out for any particular violation. It's more that the school, the administration just decides you would be more suitable or more comfortable somewhere else. And so it's kind of a little bit more maybe decorous than just being kicked out. And it can have to do with grades, too.
And the school doesn't want you to have anything nasty on your beginning resume.
Yes. It's not expulsion, but it's sort of the more polite cousin of expulsion.
It all sounds like football teams. You're no longer the coach because we're going in a different direction. Mm-hmm. And speaking of a different direction, you're going in a different direction. You've written a new novel, The Man of My Dreams, which is going to be out this summer. Yes.
It'll be out in May, actually. So.
In May. What can you tell us in a few seconds about The Man of My Dreams?
It covers 14 years in the life of the protagonist, so ages 14 to 28. And I think she's a little less neurotic than Lee, I hope.
Oh, that would be good. I could do that. Oh, Prep is the title of this novel. Curtis Sittenfeld is the author. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.